Again, if you've been finding this conversation interesting or infuriating, one or the other, both count, right? Then head over to this channel, hit that follow button. If you haven't done so yet, hit that follow button, make sure notifications are on. So you know I'm going live videos 6 nights a week, exclamation point social and chat for all of our social media, right? We got a lot of that. We got our Twitters, we got our Discord, heart and soul, everything. We do everything on Discord. And YouTube, if you missed any of this, right? Any of this non-brainworms, then you can find it on YouTube. Like, comment, and subscribe. Also consider helping out the channel, supporting this community, right? Sub to the channel or gift bits or gift subs. We happen to be in a hype train right now. Let's see if we get to level 2. We're at 50%. We can get to level 2 hype train. That'd be pretty cool, right? Subs to the channel, gift bits or gift subs, support this community and all the things that we do. And since we're always here for you. So thank you for the people who've been helping out so far. All right. We'll move on to the next thing. All right. He's not around, it doesn't matter. Topic 2. Around the world, there are millions of people in slavery / indentured servitude / bonded labor. In many countries, slavery is effectively unofficially sanctioned, India being chief among them. For nations that refuse to take serious action to end such practices, should the US and other world powers consider sanctioning them or taking other corrective measures? Does it make a difference that some of these individuals signed a contract to enter into servitude? Or would the economic cost of ending slavery be too much to bear? Okay, yeah, so lots of, in case you don't know, slavery is not a thing of the past. It exists throughout the world, and it exists here. But there seems to be some countries that allow for more of it to exist than others. So for those nations, should we take action against them, right? And one of those actions could be sanctions. So thank you. And you, Chris, thank you for the kind gift sub. Thanks for the help. Much appreciated. Guys, how about the hype train? 67%. So you get love too. Sub to the channel, get bits or gift subs. Thank you so much. All right, you, Chris, please, opening statement.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of things done and signed under duress, no, I don't think a contract matters in cases of things like debt slavery, right? There's a reason why in the 2 example articles that we had to read for this, they note that, right, debt slavery is technically illegal in India, and in both of these articles are about sort of indentured servitude in India. So yeah, it's technically illegal. There's just problems. The law is toothless and all these other criticisms, right? But the reason that is because there are certain situations where we say that people can't sign away certain rights or certain periods of their life and work and labor. And one of those is being in an extreme debt. We're not letting people sell themselves into slavery to clear debt anymore, and we don't have debt prisons in the US anymore, thankfully, in a lot of ways. But yeah, but it obviously still exists. As far as whether or not we should sanction these nations, what we should do about it, I don't know. I'm very small brain on this. I do political science, but I do political theory, which is just reading and writing about dead people. So I feel like I should leave it to like my colleagues in international relations, who are probably dumber than us theorists, to tell me whether or not that sanctions work, or how we can accomplish them most effectively. I do think there is a problem that we should talk about, where if we decide to have a kind of moral framework on an international scale, and we decide to stop doing business with nations based on them doing things that we don't like, we're going to have some real problems with, like oil interests in Saudi Arabia and things like that, right? Like there's a whole host of countries that we have very close ties with who have very different views than the current U.S. mainstream on social issues and religious issues, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't really know how we parse that out. Is slavery the thing, or are there other things that we need to be considering moral sanctions for? I'm not sure, so y'all can convince me, maybe.
Thanks so much. Start us, please.
Yep. So, sanctions, from what I could read on sanctions in favor of human rights, they have mixed results. In a country like India, where the government's taking measures to fix the situation, although they're not the best at enforcing it, I don't think sanctions are helpful. Probably aid would be more helpful in alleviating the circumstances that create this create bonded labor, create people who end up entering into those contracts. So I mean, to even do sanctions, we would have to determine what counts as unjust and what counts as forced labor. And I don't know if we can intervene just because a country's bad at enforcing a law. I just think in general it would be better if we provided aid, especially to developing countries where this is happening. So.
Thanks so much. All right. Before we go to Scott, guys, how about the hype train? We're almost there. It's 25% of level 2 hype train. Let's see if we can get to level 3. Thank you for the ones who are helping out. Subs to the channel, give bits or give subs, support this community. Much appreciated. Thank you to all the people who are helping out right now. All right, let's go to Fabian Litter, Scott.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I kind of agree with both Eucharist and Stardust here for the most part. Obviously, slavery is wrong. Bonded labor, as it looks in India and in many other countries, it's essentially slavery. Especially when you're talking about children whose ability to consent is even, doesn't exist, right? But the problem that I see most with this idea of sanctions and things like that is the major reason that these things still exist. It's not culture. There's been a lot of studies that have shown that it's not culture that causes these things. What it is poverty. Poverty causes these things. And the best way to solve poverty is with aid, is with additional resources and things of that nature, but it's also to allow their economy to flourish. So if you're going after countries and inducing like economic sanctions against them based off of the moral actions of slavery, you're just prolonging what is already a problem here, which is the poverty that exists that is helping support this behavior. I mean, when you look at the article that PrimeCayes showed, there was a father that they described as indifferent because he basically sold his child to slavery, and he's like, well, I have 7 mouths to feed. Like, what the fuck did you want me to do? And that's really the crux of the problem here, is that we need education, we need resources, we need economic activity, and you're not going to be able to produce and stimulate positive economic activity unless you, while also sanctioning a country. Right. It's just the two goals work against each other. So, I mean, if you want to stop these things, you can't engage in sanctions. And like I said, bonded labor is essentially slavery. There's no real distinction there.
Okay. Pretty sure while Steven's away, right? This is a mission that I'm right. That whatever it is, my position is on this topic, that I'm right. That's what he said. Steven, you made it back.
Yeah, I'm gonna give the hot take that slavery is wrong. I think I don't know how many other people feel that way on this panel. Sanctioning countries seems to be not a good idea, just because I don't think you're gonna get everybody else on board with it. I think that usually when I hear about people making progress in other countries when it comes to things like labor rights, usually it's through the form of these negotiated trade agreements. So for instance, Vietnam was supposed to have historic labor reforms in order to join the TPP. A lot of these labor unions will get together and kind of negotiate these agreements across seas, because not only is it good to make it so there's no slave labor in another economy because of moral reasons, it's also good for your own economy because you don't want to have your own workers necessarily competing with people that are like slaves, because it causes a whole bunch of bad shit happening all around. So I think that we should negotiate these things economically. I think aid is always good. I don't know if you can ever fix a country's institutional poverty with any amount of aid, but I think that just sanctioning the fuck out of poor countries who have people that are turning to bonded slavery because they're poor doesn't seem to be a good route to go. I don't think that'll affect the changes that we want.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you to people who have helped out. We're at level 3 hype train. Subs to the channel, give bits, give subs, support this community, all things we do. You like all this stuff, then help us out, and so I can keep doing this for you. All right, you're doing yourself a favor. All right, so we'll go finally. You are doing yourself a favor by subbing to my channel. All right, there's nothing laughable about that. That makes sense.
Shut up. I'm just gonna steal that.
Okay. All right, please, Doobie.
So I guess my position on, obviously slavery is bad, but I actually don't think I'd consider bonded labor a form of slavery. I think it's totally reasonable to have a system in which people are allowed to bargain using their labor, right, to get loans or whatever the fuck. That seems fine to me. And calling those people victims of slavery, I think, waters down what slavery actually is. But so that being said, I think that if we were to end actual slavery, like human beings owning other human beings, and even through their birth or through birth owning their children and shit like that, then I think that sanctions might be good in some cases, but I think you could even argue that you might need to go further, like the UK did. Right, the Royal Navy freed lots of slaves, right, all over the planet. They started refusing to do trade with countries and with ports that had slaves, right, and through this they actually forced some of these places to change their policies, right, and while doing this, they used their Royal Navy to attack slave ships, right, and to free the slaves that were on them, right. So I think if you're going to do this, I don't think half measures work. Right? I think you need to go full speed and be open to using even force to change these people's the laws or whatever the fuck in their land that's allowing people to be like sold into slavery.
Thank you so much. We'll go to open panel. But also, guys, sub to the channel. Give subs. How about the channel? All right, go ahead. Open the panel.
I guess maybe we could turn this into a fight based on what Doobie said about like the definition of slavery we want to work with, right? Because if we're just talking about chattel slavery, which is what you've described, where you literally own a person like you would own any other piece of property, and you own their descendants as well. Okay, yeah, I mean that's not necessarily what's happening here, right? It does happen still in places in the world, but it's not what we're talking about in this case with people in great debt or just super poor, basically bonding off their children for a period of time. But what we are talking about is the kind of slavery that's defined in like the 13th Amendment, which says like slavery or involuntary servitude. They're kind of conflated in a sense. And involuntary servitude, if we're still talking about things that are done under duress, can like something that is involuntary, something that is not meaningfully and freely chosen, could still be something like, well, you have the option of this infinitely exponential debt, or you can work for me in horrific conditions for the next 10 years and then I'll forgive your debt, right? Like that's not a super meaningful choice in the sense that we normally mean having a free voluntary choice. So
Yeah, but I feel like that line of thinking leads you to the shitty economy position that in a capitalist system, all work is slavery, right? All work is exploitation. All of it's slavery because you need a job, you need food to feed yourself, and if you don't feed yourself, you're gonna end up on the street and die, right? So
Yeah, but
I think that's how.
Because
So
one's voluntary and one's involuntary.
No, that's
he gave
okay,
it to you in the definition.
Bonded laborers, right, aren't like scooped up and forced to sign a contract, right? These are people.
They literally are.
No, they're not. No, these are people who have taken loans from a business, from a person, and the way that they're going to repay this loan is through labor over time, because they don't have the capital to pay it up.
They don't have the ability to leave.
They do have the ability to leave when they pass the loan.
They don't.
You allow
they
them
don't
to opt
know
in
that they have
suicide.
Oh my god, Stardust! Fuck off.
Wait. Can we get Prime? Can you define what are we talking about here? What kind of labors are we talking about? Because I think this is probably going to be incredibly important to this conversation topic, right?
I'm talking about a wide variety of a enforced labor, right? So I guess I maybe I see what the problem you're talking about. So some of it, no, maybe I don't, because all of it's coerced, right? So it's coerced.
Yeah, but there's going to be levels of coercion. Like it's kind of
exactly.
coercive if I take out like a loan, a payday loan, and I've got to work to pay back the payday loan. But I don't know if we're all going to say that's the same level of coercion as like somebody, like captures my family and forces me to take like a false visa and work in another country.
Exactly.
These are different things, right?
We're talking about this wide spectrum, and we could talk about how do we deal with each of those levels, right? So bonded labor, right? We can talk about that, and then like straight up fucking slavery, right? Indentured servitude. We can talk about all of that, and if they require a different response. But yes, these are things where you just don't have a choice about it. Go ahead.
So I have a this I mentioned earlier when Doobie was going off, and I actually kind of weirdly agreed with what he was saying, but he said it was a dumb point. I think it wasn't a dumb point. Right? I said, yeah, let's talk about the servile state, right? So everybody should read Hilaire Belloc's The Servile State, and one of the things that he says in that is like assessing whether or not a state is servile in comparison to the literal like servile system, the feudal system. He's like, you're born on the land, you work for the Lord, you're forced to toil here, you don't have any say in the issue, there's no meaningful freedom, right? That dissolves at a certain point, and now we've moved into a new system of production. What's it actually like? Is it any meaningfully different in terms of being servile? And one of the questions that he asks towards the end is, if you were to approach those millions of families now living at a wage with the proposal for a contract of service for life, guaranteeing them employment at what each regarded as his usual full wage, how many would refuse? Or the implication is most people would take this, right? And the reason that they would take it is because they don't see their life getting better, and they don't see really any other option than what they're doing, which is working at a wage, just struggling to get by, usually in debt, right? The choice is not, in that case, super meaningful. Yes, they could technically refuse if we're presenting this hypothetical. Yes, there are technically other options, but especially in this case with like what we were talking about with like the Indian father, it's like, look, I have this many kids, I have this many mouths to feed. What are my options here? Either some of them die, some of them starve to death, some of them die young, or I let him go work in a horrific condition, and he earns a wage that enables us not to default on our debt and enables me to survive and the rest of our family to survive. Like, yeah, it's not fully free in the way that we would like it to be, at the very least. If we want to distinguish it between, actually kidnapping and selling people, yes, we should distinguish those things, but it's not as if it is a fully free choice.
So bonded slavery in India specifically, since that's kind of what we were primed with the articles, right? Most of these people don't know that bonded labor is illegal. Most of these people have no idea that they can go to the government and get assistance and get their children an education. Most of these people aren't aware that it's been illegal since the 70s, and that the Supreme Court in India reaffirmed it in the 80s and made extremely strict language in their affirmation that stated that bonded labor was a form of slavery. Most of these people don't have access to any of those things. Most of these people don't even speak the same language as where they're from, as they are moved and displaced and in many ways tortured with work, so that they're in a place where they don't even speak the language and they have to learn a language, and they actually forget the language of like the rest of their family. It is a entirely different situation than, let's say, someone who has a temporary choice to work a job that they can quit, and then there's no monopoly there and they can go look for another job. These people are, for all intents and purposes, believe that they have signed away all of their rights and that there's nothing they can do and they must obey their masters. And that's why rape is such an extremely likely thing for girls. And it is why when you speak to experts, one of them would be Dr. Kevin Bales talks a lot about this there's an NPR article you can look at, but he wrote a bunch of books. He teaches about contemporary slavery in England. It's usually the women that lead these like anti-slavery movements and like awakening things. And that's because so many of them have been so severely raped over and over again by their masters that they don't want that life for their daughters. And it's usually the men that have just been physically exerted in a lot of ways. And so these movements usually start with the women. They have to infiltrate these communities with spies. And these spies have to come in and talk to them and start to psychologically work with them, because they have no idea that they're not slaves. These people are slaves.
Okay, so appealing to the ignorance of these people who signed into like contracts without understanding the contract, I guess that's an issue. But it seems like the issue is their ignorance, right? So like if they knew that they could read the contract, they understood the contract, they could speak the language, right? But they still were in desperation. They needed food, they needed clothing, whatever it was. So they took this loan and they signed themselves up for 10 years of labor, right? In exchange for this loan, right? Is that
Selling
okay,
your
or is it
children.
specifically the conditions, right? That are the issue.
First of all, you can sign one, but there's no such thing as a valid contract where the person gets to own the right to your body and you can't leave that contract. You can still owe that person money. That you right? Like you can agree to work for someone with contract work and then be like, yeah, fuck this place, I'm out, and then you owe them money.
Yeah,
because
but if
they
these
gave
people
you
are
money.
specifically like signing
You're saying
away
it's not a
their
valid
labor,
contract.
if these people are specifically signing away their labor, right? Like why Why shouldn't they be allowed to do that?
Why shouldn't
Because
they be allowed to
they're
do that?
selling their children into labor,
That's
right?
part of it.
Well, they own their children, right? So if you're in a
No, they
country
don't.
where hold on, yeah, well, yeah, they do.
I mean,
So if you're
technically,
in a
maybe, but
if you're in a country where the reality of life is, this kind of desperate struggle, right? And your options are, hey, your kid stays at home with probably nobody to take care of them, right? Or they work out here with you, where you can watch them and they earn some money, right? It seems like a lot of these people are going to take the second option, right? And
Okay,
that
first
might
of
be
all,
okay. I feel
don't
like
own
these
children.
I feel like these child
Children are
labor
not
laws are like
property.
a first world luxury, right? In a lot of these places, it's just not realistic.
No, I mean, I literally did a giant debate on this not too long ago, right? In terms of child labor laws. But the fact of the matter is that you're asking whether or not they can do this and whether or not this is wrong, not whether or not these laws should exist or are effective, and not whether or not we should be using sanctions as a means of stopping it. Right. So we're at a definitional level here. And what I'm saying is definitionally it's slavery.
I don't think it is, right? Maybe there's some people that would meet that requirement, but I
Well,
think if they've signed a contract, right? You could say, hey, they didn't meet I think what's called like the pillars of like a contract or whatever the fuck, where you need to understand the contract, you need to consider the contract, you need to like you can't be under like any form of coercion. You need to be of like sound mind, right? If they don't meet those requirements, and I think we use those here in the United States, I don't know if they have them in India, right?
Mhm. Well,
Then maybe you could say, hey, the contract's not valid because this person literally didn't understand what they were signing, right? But if they
it's an
did,
unconscionable contract, right?
yeah,
It's
sure, I
unconscionable.
can understand that. That's I understand. But if they did understand what they were signing, if they did understand that they were signing up for 10 years of hard labor in exchange for this loan or whatever it is they're getting, right? Why shouldn't they be allowed to do that?
Because I've already told you that. We're just getting in circles. We just disagree.
Wait, hold on. You just don't think that you just don't think they should. You think someone shouldn't have
I don't
that
think
kind
it's
of
a
autonomy
valid
where they can
contract.
sign away their.
I don't think you can sign away your rights via contract. You can't sign away your rights via contract unless you are of the opinion that rights are simply created by the state. And then if that is your opinion, I understand that we disagree and we will likely never
But people
agree.
sign away their rights all the time through like their for example, their ability to speak about a certain topic. Right? They'll sign that away through a contract. Right? Like
A
why this
non-disclosure agreement is a whole nother host of issues that could be debated, I'm sure. I guess, yeah.
Okay, but it's people signing away one of their rights, one of their fundamental rights, right? The right of expression in a contract. Why is the right to like labor or this right, specifically so important to you? And even if they
do you know how an NDA works?
As part of this contract,
Or filibuster. Do you
as
know
part of the labor that they were doing was like sex work, right? They had to have sex with this person who was giving them the loan.
Don't try and run away from it.
Again, why would that be an issue?
Don't try and run away from it. So
I'm
an
not running
NDA,
away from
right?
anything.
An NDA, right? What's the difference between an NDA and the situation we're describing, and why are we saying that an NDA isn't slavery, but bonded labor is slavery?
I'm not arguing that NDAs are slavery. You said.
But why is there a difference? You said it's okay to sign away your rights.
I don't think it's that different, right? So, you said that people cannot sign away their rights through contracts. I've given you an example of where you can literally do that and be legally enforced.
Poor Doobie. Let me explain this to you. So, what happens if you violate an NDA?
You get taken to court, probably get sued.
Right, and you owe money.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So, what happens if you just go and you're in India and you're in bonded labor and you say, Master, I don't want to work today. I think I don't like the terms of our contract. They beat the dog shit out of you. And if you're a woman, they rape you and then they put you back in the fucking field.
That's not true. Yeah, that is not true. These people, because this is bonded labor, right? They have a way to pay themselves out of this contract. Right. If they don't like the contract, they can get the money to pay out of it, right? Or they can get their family to gather the money and pay it for them.
Oftentimes, oftentimes the way that they're being paid is really unfair. So, any normal person would have paid off that debt long before the person in that bonded labor contract is able to do so.
Yeah, that's the issue of some of these contracts, right? Where they will add on money, they'll add on like unreasonable interest, shit like that, right?
But I mean, but that's part of what we have in the American system, right? And why the Supreme Court decided that what an unconscionable contract is. And that was determined off of a woman that went to a payday loan, right? Barely spoke English. And the payday loan contract was written in like extreme legalese. And she ended up thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in debt, not understanding the contract. And the Supreme Court decided that this contract is unconscionable because it's written in a way that she really couldn't understand the terms of the agreement and didn't understand the effects of what was occurring. And that's what we're talking about in bonded labor. So that just made the entire contract invalid, right? To where she didn't have to pay a dime or anything. But in order for a contract to be valid, you have to have an exit. You have to be able to exit the contract. You may owe some restitution. You may owe some property or some money or something, right? Some currency. But when you're in a situation where you're in bonded labor, you don't get to exit. You're kidnapped. You're taken away from places.
That's not true.
You're hidden from the authorities. Okay, if you're just going to deny the horrors of slavery that are occurring, then like I'm denying
that you're like I'm denying your fucking rhetoric about what bonded labor is. Right, I'm sure that happens to some of these people.
Good guy Doobie, the slavery apologist in India. Like,
hold on,
whatever, dude.
No,
like,
I'm saying, oh god,
we need one advocate, I guess, at least.
I'm not advocating for slavery. I'm advocating for the ability for somebody to sign away their labor in a contract. Like that doesn't seem that controversial to me. Now, I understand that some of these people, who maybe lots of these people who sign those contracts in India right now, are being exploited. Sure, right? But I'm saying, if you have the ability to understand the contract, and if you know, hey, I mean,
sure, we're talking about some 18 million people.
Yeah, and within that 18 million people, can you not imagine that some of these people aren't fucking, ignorant and understand what they're signing?
The difference is that this, if it was an adult signing their labor away, I think it's still exploitative, but
no, it's slavery.
A little bit, it's slavery, yeah. But the point, what we're talking about here is that it's the prevalence of how often they sign away their children into labor.
I mean,
and this is like a 13-year-old kid. There's no way that they're going to pay off like $10,000.
Here's the question: if there was like hypothetically, I'm gonna use a loaded term. I'm gonna say fair. Okay, if there was a fair labor market, do you think that people that ever engage in these bonded labor contracts, Doobie?
Yeah, I think so. Somebody let's say somebody wanted to buy like a new gaming PC, and they didn't want to save it up, save up at work, whatever the fuck. They get the loan, they sign away, work on weekends for however long, and they get the gaming PC right now. I can imagine people doing that.
Right. Well, what happens when they get raped when they show up to their job?
Well, I don't think people should be getting raped, obviously.
Right, and then,
right? But are they forced to stay
there now? Are they
no? Obviously not. I don't think signing away
labor. That's
labor.
what we're talking about when we're talking about bonded labor in India.
I don't think signing away labor implies that people can just torture you and rape you and do whatever the fuck they want to you. Like I mentioned, there's some kind of rights.
Yeah. Right? So bonded labor. Let's just make believe, right? That you could have a fair workplace environment. At least safe a safe workplace environment that you were going to pay off your debt, but you had 8-hour days, right, rather than 14-hour days. For instance, the Indian brick kilns, oftentimes during the summer, 14-hour days these people have to work. But let's say you worked 8-hour days, and gave you proper food and water, the basics, right? Would that preclude some of your preclude your arguments against it, or against Doobie? Excuse me.
No, the argument is not about the type of labor or how hard it is, right? The argument isn't even necessarily the working conditions. The argument is that in order for it not to be slavery, I have to have an exit from the contract, and these people are tortured and manipulated and hidden from the truth to believe that they have no exit, and they are punished by masters that maintain their power over them so that they don't have the ability to exit the contract.
I get you. I get that. But I think what Doobie is trying to do is test your limits here as to like where your objection is. Is it bonded labor in general, or bonded as a concept, or bonded labor plus everything else that goes along with it, right? Yeah.
working conditions and like being raped and shit, and hidden from society or whatever the
And
fuck.
with bonded labor, there's an exit, right? There's an exit being once you pay off, right? That's your exit. You paid off your contract.
That's not an exit,
Okay.
right? Like
Oftentimes
you
it's
have to be able to exit at any moment, or you no longer have your freedom. Therefore, you
Right.
are a slave.
Well, and also as the situations as described in this article are, you're locked into a contract basically where you are working and the wage you are making is not enough to keep up with the exponential interest on the loan. So it's not really, the exit is not as clear
Yeah.
cut or definable, right? Like,
I mean, there are people that do bonded labor for 6 or 7 years in India and then pay off their debts. It happens, right? There are also people that get help from anti-slavery organizations and underground tunnels, doing everything they can to inform people of their rights because it's illegal in India, despite there being almost 20 million people enslaved.
right. So this was a question I had. Sorry if I missed you guys talking about this. My baby was waking up. But the question that we had was basically, what should the U.S. do, right, in this case where, like Astartes pointed out, right, like it's a case where a country is kind of failing to effectively enforce its own law and is doing something that we already think is bad and they clearly already think is bad, at least on paper, right? So what are the steps that should be taken in that case? Like I'm not sure, like as like Destiny said, right, the effectiveness of sanctions in the case where like you're sanctioning a country with a bunch of starving people is not really it's not, right? Like it's a different case from like sanctioning a country to punish them for doing some sort of like military offensive action that threatens the U.S. interests, right? Those are different sorts of
We don't have a crystal ball, but we do have examples of what happens when nation states attempt to intervene in these markets, right? From the outside. And when you start threatening sanctions, like one example, and I've talked about this recently, is in Bangladesh in 1992, Senator Harkin was threatening to sanction and boycott goods in the ready-made garment industry in Bangladesh. And what ended up happening, even though the legislation itself didn't pass, what ended up happening was in 1992 and 1993, that industry fired 50,000 child workers, right? They said, okay, we're going to comply. We're going to get rid of these child workers. We know that you guys like are threatening us. We want to kill this bill kind of thing. Like we don't want this to be an issue. And so UNICEF in 1997, and interestingly enough, even though I fucking hate the guy, Paul Krugman, left-wing economist, right? Them and Oxfam, several people looked at studies and went to find these children. And what they found was that the overwhelming majority of these children ended up in more dangerous professions, that they went into the black market with less regulation, that many of them were sold into child sex trafficking, were sent out of the country, where their passports were taken and disappeared into sex trafficking and things of that nature. So like when you talk about sanctions and heavy-handed things like this at a state that's already failing to control what it believes to be morally perverse, you're not doing anything to help here. If you want to help, you have to help by changing the economic conditions. Like, not to be too much of a materialist here, right? Or I'll end up sounding like a fucking socialist, but like you have to change the economic conditions on the ground in some capacity so that the poverty is gone. The poverty and the lack of education is what's causing this more than anything. And of course, war, when we're talking about like the Congo, but that's a different situation.
I'm curious. You talk about how like there's like how would you consider like most debt? Do you consider most debt unethical? Because at the end of the day, technically you have to give some of your labor to pay it back or else you're going to go to jail? Or should debt not be enforceable by a prison sentence? Or
what do you mean by most debt?
So like let's say that you take out a loan and let's say that you don't pay the loan back. At some point, somebody's going to say that like somebody should be able to imprison you because eventually somebody's going to try to sue you for the money. If you don't pay the money, there might be like a summons, and then like at the end of the road, it's going to be a prison sentence, right?
No, I don't. I kind of already hinted at this earlier. I don't believe in involuntary prison sentences.
Yeah, but then like just theoretically in that society, you ever worry that there's just like no way that anybody ever takes out a loan or issues debt because you have no guarantee at the end of the day you'll ever get the money back?
Well, no, I think what people would do is people would have insurers, right? I mean, it's essentially the same thing as like when your parent co-signs a loan for you, right? You want to get a car, you're 16 and like you're upper middle class, you want to get a new car, right? But like you can't, like they'll never loan you a fucking car because you're a 16-year-old dumbass, but your parents will co-sign for you, right? And then they do the same thing. I don't see any reason why insurance companies wouldn't do the same thing, and people would refuse to do
But like,
interaction
if
with you.
somebody is just like, I'm not going to pay you back, what happens at the end of the day?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of market
out.
solutions.
There's risk. There's
Right,
risk.
right. There's a lot of market
Yeah, wait.
solutions to
I
how
want to
different
hear one of
societies
them.
would
That's what
handle
I
this.
want to hear one of them. So let's say it's like,
So
I'm not
one of them, like most peaceful, right, would be simply persona non grata. Your credit is destroyed. No one will loan money to you ever again. No one will want to do business with you again. No one's going to want to help or do anything with that. And if you have to get a co-signer of an insurance in order to do type of business, your rates are going to go up, right? So
But that
someone
means
that
effectively that every single poor person in this economy is never taking out a loan, right? Because nobody would loan to a poor person if there's no recompense at the end of the day. Like you have no guarantee.
right, but like I said, you would have insurance, right? So you
Why-
could
if
just
you're a poor person, you can't afford whatever you need a loan for. Well, how would you be able to afford insurance?
okay, well, so now you have to engage with what is a poor person and what is the economic material conditions of what
Sure, the
society
economic
might look
material
like.
conditions is whatever exists today in America, and a poor person is whatever exists today in America. How do one
Yeah,
of these
I-
poor people go out and get a loan if there's no ability to pursue that loan at the end of the day from a legal perspective?
Okay, so again, this person is so destitute that they have an inability to gain any type of insurance or anything like that.
Okay,
Now
wait,
we're
hold on,
engaging.
wait, hold on. You're making this sound ridiculous, but that's not ridiculous. There are plenty of working poor people that can't afford.
No, I'm not trying to make it sound ridiculous. If it sounded like I was trying to straw man your position
Okay.
or like
So
weaken
it's
your
not
position,
so it's
I
like an
wasn't really
average
trying to.
working poor person
So-
that has to go to like a buy here, pay here car place, which is a place that will finance on their own, and they don't go through like any sort of like banker financing.
Right. So again, yeah. So I mean, like, you have welfare systems with the state that we currently have, right? But there's also pro bono situations for people to be able to get lawyers, for example, right? I think the economy would look drastically different. So the economy would look drastically different than, let's say, a nation state that enforces poverty in many ways via, inflation that occurs, via, an overly burdensome tax system, via like the way that regulatory capture occurs in the state. Like there are a lot of problems that I think the state involves in that makes people poorer than they would be under the system in which I advocate for. And I just don't see that being as big of an issue as it is today. And I believe that charity and that it creates a market void for systems that the state is currently handling in order for people to live in a happier, healthier society. I have a whole video on it. I don't want to go too far into it. If you want to check it out at some point, I can DM it to you and like not mention it here so that it's not like I'm trying to get clout or something.
Okay, so for
I'm
this
just
to work,
wondering-
it would be a whole reshuffling of the system, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty fucking radical as an anarchist. Who would have thought?
Okay.
I mean, I'll begin by saying, as I have said many times on Prime's panels before, usury is a sin and should still be a crime. Okay, so just getting that out of the way. But I guess my question is like, why do you think, Destiny, that like payday loan places? There are lots of circumstances, it seems to me, in our current system that I think is exploitative of poor people in a lot of ways, where amounts are loaned out that they cannot reasonably expect will be paid back, but just
I don't think that happens in today's system, no.
I think like the people that I know who are able to
What
go
about
get
payday loans?
that's what I'm saying, like absurd amounts at
most
these
people
at these
assume you're
loan
going to be able
places.
to either pay back the payday loans, or the charges are so high that you assume a high rate of default on them.
Right. So that's I guess what is the incentive in that system to loan back? Like, is it just it works out in the wash that enough people are going to
payday
pay
loans are
back?
profitable. Yeah, they must be, right? If these companies exist, otherwise they wouldn't exist, right?
Yeah, typically they'll ask you when you're like
Usually they'll have a dig on your next paycheck, basically. You have
Exactly.
to take your next paycheck,
Yeah.
cash it to them, and that's how these places work. Yeah.
But do you think that's ethical? Do you think we should have payday loans?
I don't think credit cards should exist, but
Okay, well, we agree.
I'm just
We're
saying
fine.
that under the no, we absolutely don't agree, because all forms of loaning shouldn't exist, because that doesn't make sense. We wouldn't expect every citizen to carry the adequate amount of capital at every point in time for every purchase in their life. You should be able to take a loan out for money. I think there's times where that trade makes sense. But I mean, like, I think there are forms of loans that prey on people's financial ineptitude. So
I think there are forms of loans that you can expect recompense that are not necessarily the same as usury. Like we can hash this out, but
wait,
yeah,
what
I
is
think
you?
like
Oh, hold on, I'm sorry. My understanding, usury just means loaning something with an interest rate. What does usury mean to you?
well, that's complicated in a modern financial system, right? Like usurious interest and interest are not necessarily the same thing, because like there's like expected productivity with the money, and then there's like beyond that, right? And in an inflationary system, we're at a like things get wacky ethically, but
Wait, hold on.
um,
Can you
Usury,
explain?
usury,
Yeah,
Usury
just
is
explain
an
what
it's,
is
it's
usury.
high
no,
interest
usury
rate.
is loaning thing at an interest rate beyond some reasonable level of interest.
Yeah.
right.
Not,
Well,
not in the way
traditionally,
that he was using it though, because unless Eucharist, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Catholics believe that like loaning with interest at all is a sin. Right. This
that
is why like
that was
in the olden
that is the
days
like
they
historical
they
traditional
forced
position.
Jews to do the bankings.
Yes, that was the historical traditional position. Yes, but I feel like
Yeah.
there's lots of actual like modern Catholic social thought economics on this. Like
Okay, gotcha. So
in
usury is
in
bad tautologically because it means that you're loaning at exploitative interest
Yeah.
rates.
right in a system in an inflationary system, right? There's an expected productivity of money that we can kind of baseline, and so like yes, like loaning out to say like yes, you should be doing something, and we should like the profits can be split, or there's all sorts of ways we can hash this out, right? But
Sure, but that's not
things
going
like
to
credit.
work for the average consumer because not everybody is taking a loan out with the idea of capitalizing on that and increasing like revenues in the future or something, right? Like some people
No, so
want
I'm
TVs or
in a sense in my ideal society, I'm not anarchist, but I'm somewhat optimistic like Scott, where I feel like like I think charitable loaning exists. Charitable loaning exists right now, where we have like these micro loan apps that people loan all sorts of money out at no interest. Like this already happens, and people are taking a loss on a large amount of money that they're loaning out. And
wait, do you think that
donating
is
it.
adequately that could adequately address the needs of the majority of the population, like charity loans?
Well,
I mean, so
no, not
systems
necessarily, but I think it's better than usury, or
There-
better than credit cards, and better than
there are
payday loans,
actually
yeah.
there are actually systems of healthcare coverage that certain Christian groups have engaged in.
Christian care
Hilariously,
Medishare, yeah.
right. So what they'll do is instead of having the healthcare system like a company like we have today, it runs much more like a co-op, which is hilarious that the Christians are more socialist than the lefties that hate the Christians so much. But what they'll do is they'll create progressive systems where they'll say like, here's your income. We want you to pay this amount. And then what they'll do is for any large purchases that they don't have in the fund, they basically do like these GoFundMe internal healthcare systems where everybody gets sent this thing like, hey, Christy needs a heart transplant and we're short $1 million. Like, please work on this thing. And so they use a charity model and a progressive, like kind of co-op model in order to create a healthcare system that tends to be more effective and but it's not for profit than for-profit insurance companies and are adequately able to handle everybody's health insurance needs based off of like a Christian co-op model in that regard. So there are a lot of more advanced ways to do things than just like someone at your church loans you $100, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, if I'll say what, like, I grew up relatively poor, and we had Christian care Medishare most of my life, and there are huge downsides. There are lots of issues,
Especially
that
if you
go
want
into
birth
it.
control.
Yeah. But so yes, I will say one thing for the people that I grew up with is they're really good at forming organizations and institutions to address these sort of things. The same thing is similarly true within homeschooling, where like there's local parallel institutions that like really develop to try to like shore up the local resources that they have. They're really good at it in a lot of ways, and I also kind of want to go back to these people now and be like, you realize that this is like what a lot of the people you think are stupid are advocating for, right? This communal co-op kind of stuff. Like I don't know, but yeah, I don't think microloans are the solution to debt slavery in India. I'm just saying like it exists already, and I think it's obviously morally preferable to payday loans.
So the coercion of payday loans, saying that like if we can garnish your wages, we can like hit you with this crazy high interest rates, and like they're just absolutely ridiculous. If you ever looked into it, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like that makes
the garnishment.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No,
No,
go ahead.
the garnishment of wages is extremely rare in these situations. Most payday loans don't even really Like they exist on American soil, but they're based in like Native American reservation. Like there's a whole history of payday loans that are like really like if you really want to get into that. But yeah, that's not as common. But again, it's not bonded labor. It's not debt slavery, because you can opt out of this, right? Like at any one point in time, you can say, I'm done with this. I can go, I have the freedom of movement. I can go work somewhere else. I can go do other things. Just because you have a debt, it's not the same thing as debt slavery.
So,
There's
so
a very
is that your
difference.
exit? Your exit is to like simply leave and not pay back, right?
Just default and not pay
Yeah,
back.
default.
That is
Default
a
and
possible
ultimately
exit.
in prison, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Can you say yes? It does. That's where defaulting ends. If you refuse to pay it back,
Can you
get
give
a
me
quarter
one
of-
example? Can you give me one example of a human in all of America that has gone to jail for defaulting on a payday loan? Can you give me one? Just one?
that I know personally? No, but what
No.
happens?
Can you Google and find one person? I'm just curious. Like I don't know. I haven't Googled it. I'm willing to bet there hasn't been one.
Wait, so nothing is actionable legally. If your wages are garnished and everything else, you can't. There's no like civil penalties or anything where you can end up in jail at the end of that.
I just want you to find me one where that's ever happened.
I'm not googling shit for you after hearing like, well, I've heard about this person all night. I'm good on that one.
From what I said earlier is when I said like debtors prisons don't really exist in the same way they used to. Like in the founding era, like we had one of our founding Supreme Court justices literally spent like a decade in debtors prison, like literally just in prison because he was a gambler. Like it's just crazy.
All of Georgia.
But yeah, but now what we have that people call debtors prisons are people who have things like traffic fines and things like that who end up in prison. But I am fairly
the state will do that.
I am fairly sure that like when it comes to things like payday loans, defaulting and then bankruptcy is the traditional path, and you don't. I'm not sure that there ever ends up being any actual incarceration for those things. But if people have examples, they can correct.
Well, if you don't,
yeah, no, I just don't think that's any you can find any because I just don't think that exists.
There are debtor prisons in America.
Right. Again, like I said, there's a distinction between the state. The state does whatever the fuck it wants to do.
Well, okay. I guess my question is, aside from the anarchist points, right? In terms of debtors prisons, right? Like, I am curious about the actual examples of people when it comes like an actual like a loan. Like I go down to the payday cash loan that's like 5 minutes away from me in the bad part of town, right? And I default on that, and I refuse to pay. I refuse to pay. They go through all the options of hitting my credit, of taking liens, garnishing my wages, whatever. Are there points where that person, not for failing to pay a traffic ticket, not for failing to appear in court, those sorts of things, but that person for failing to pay a debt ends up in prison? I
guess if you're willing to forfeit all of your non-essential assets at the end of the day, I guess probably not. If you're willing to go like
or just file bankruptcy.
Yeah,
right?
If you go Chapter 7 and you want to dump all of your non-essential assets, I think they'll let you keep a car in your house, and I guess you can avoid it if you're willing to go that route. But
yeah, like what if you refuse
right?
to liquidate your assets, right? If they came to collect your assets, then I think you would go to prison for like disobeying the judge's orders. I mean, it is unlikely that a person would go this far, right? To not pay a debt. It's unlikely because the consequences, right? We have a whole spectrum of consequences beforehand that suck, right? And so
your credit's going to be fucked for 7 years if you do the bankruptcy route.
Yeah, well, it's awful, but so like personal example, right? Like my dad is just on disability. That's all the money that he has, but he gets loans out the ass all the time, and he's defaulted on I don't know how many of them, right? And they just get sent to creditors, and the creditors eventually give up, right? He's got medical bills out the ass. It's just like people just give up, right? He's not going to prison for that. He's going to prison for other things. But like the debt has never factored into this, right? So like it's just people just give up eventually. Like so the people who own your debt, like the hospital or the payday loan place, will eventually punch it over to a creditor. It'll eventually get sold and shopped around as like sold at a discount to somebody who thinks that they can collect on it. And then when they can't, they usually just kind of give up. Like it's a weird system.
It's usually, I mean, depending upon the price, it's usually more expensive to go after the debt than to just forgive the debt at a certain point. But but again, yes, is it technically possible, right, that you refuse to pay people over and over and over again? You refuse to after it's sent to collections, you refuse to get on any reasonable payment plan. You refuse to use the legal system if it really is like a payday loan situation that is out of control and unreasonable. And you refuse any of those options. At a certain point, yes, you do owe them money if they gave you money, right? Maybe not to the terms of the contract that you signed if we're talking about payday loans where it might be an unconscionable agreement or it might just be ridiculous. But you do owe them something, right? And so at a certain point, yeah, they have a right to come and take some of your property. But I fail to see how we go down this rabbit hole in payday loans to try and make this comparison that, oh, well, it's kind of like debt slavery, when there's a very, very key distinction here. And the key distinction is that debt slavery and bonded labor takes away your liberty of movement and takes away your liberty to your own body. That's what makes it slavery.
Okay. So I wanted to move on to what is response. So India is, from what I can see from the World Atlas, apparently the third largest exporter of bricks, with 250 billion bricks being created annually. And they are made of these brick kilns, and according to another site, 96% of the people in these brick kilns are in bondage slavery, and up to 23 million of them, period, right? Up to 23 million people might be within some sort of slavery, bondage slavery, or whatever, right? So I hear you when you say that India has made it legal, right? And big quotes there, illegal. But with a system this large, it seems like they're not actually taking it seriously. It seems like the people who are in those positions are within marginalized groups, right? Within lower castes, and the system doesn't actually care, and that it is effectively, unofficially sanctioned. So if that's the case, then shouldn't we? What steps should we take to put an end to that? Now, since this is so big, since it's a huge export, and I couldn't find numbers as to how many Indian bricks actually make it to like the United States or Western nations. I couldn't find that. But let's say a fuck ton, and the results of sanctioning them and maybe not using their bricks would actually be huge against our big industry. Is it worth it, no matter what the economic cost?
It's a waste of money. It's a waste of hurting the lives of Indians. It's a waste of hurting the lives of Americans. It's a total waste of money that is not going to help the situation. What we need to do is we need to engage in several things. If I'm gonna, like Destiny said, I hate fucking agreeing with Destiny, but I have to here. Using the power to negotiate better trade relations with nations, and being able to use and flex a little bit of that like kind of soft power to engage in kind of forcing them to do some things that would make the situation better might have a positive effect. But I think the most positive effect that we can have is industrialization and more economic activity. I mean, I think Kuznets' curve is probably one of the better things about our world today, as we see income inequality kind of grow here in America. Well, it's growing here in America because it's decreasing rapidly in the developing world. That's why income inequality is growing here, is because in the second world and in the first world, people are going from pennies on the day to making dollars on the day, which to us both sound awful, but is 10 and 100-fold times better.
Yeah. So Prime, I actually found stats on our Prime. So apparently, the United States is the largest importer of Indian bricks. It's about $29 million a year, apparently. So, if and I think that if we want to impose, and of course the rest of them are like all European countries, so right. So like if the rest of them decided, hey, we're no longer going to take your bricks, right? If you don't do something about this problem, the United States said, hey, we're no longer taking your bricks. This would obviously massively affect the industry. I don't. Yeah, it's going to cause some kind of harm to those people. I think in the short term, right? Because now they might lose their jobs. right? Even if their job is like being a bonded laborer, right, in shitty conditions, right? So, but long term, like why wouldn't that be beneficial, right? To kind of force that change if we can through, just refusing to do business with these people, so long as this is an issue.
Does it actually force the change, though, is the question. Like, right, I feel like what Scott is getting at is, like, the general trend is towards progressive industrialization, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's a shitty situation. Like, there are cases where in any individual case, if we had the option of saying, no, you really shouldn't do that, and convincing someone they shouldn't, we would do it. But it seems like over time in these, whatever we're going to call them, developing nations or whatever, that there are positive economic benefits, and that yeah. So is it actually going to have the effect that you're saying? Is it going to force the change?
So it is what you're saying that if this is slavery, right, that we should not really do anything to impact the slavery, because long term it's having positive economic impacts for them and for the world.
I'm not saying that. No, I'm not saying that. I'm questioning whether or not I'm questioning whether or not what you're saying is are the options force the change, or with short-term harms, or let it ride. Like, is it actually going to force the change? That's what I want to know.
Well, if the United States and lots of like European nations are the people importing these slave bricks, right? If they no longer have these markets to sell to, like I can imagine that would have like a massive impact in the way they do business.
Right.
Right?
So a bunch of poor people. So a bunch of poor people starve, and then the people who have money are still doing fine. And then what?
Well, the people who have money have nobody to sell to anymore. Right. So now they have less money, or hey, because they want to keep making money, but maybe less money, they stop having bonded labor, right? They stop having slavery.
I gave you an example of this already, Doobie, right? Which was in Bangladesh, right? They fired childhood workers in the ready-made garment industry in 1992 and 1993, and the conditions of these child laborers were worse. They ended up in the black market in prostitution and in the sex slave industry, right? The reason is because you're not solving the problem that causes a lot of these issues. Instead, you're exacerbating it. The issue here is poverty. So we have to figure out a way to tackle poverty in the third world, right? Because the fact of the matter is that many people in the West, it seems like this really weird kind of like almost like racist kind of view is this idea that people in the third world are just like backwards people with bad ideas, and if we bully them enough, then they'll just do the right thing, when really what they're doing is they're people doing exactly what Destiny said, choosing the lesser of two evils, right? They're in a position where they don't have money, they can't feed their fucking family, and they have a baby crying with a bloated stomach from hunger pains, and a man comes around and says, I'll take your 9-year-old boy and I'll turn him into a man, and he's going to live a hard life, but you'll have food on your table. And they take that deal and they sell their child into slavery so that their other children can eat. One of the things you can look at when you look at the data is that you can find that people have made the claim that it's a cultural thing, and what they have found is that very often children that work in these industries or engage in child labor or engage in slavery, very often the entire family is not actually in slavery. Oftentimes what will happen is the boys go into slavery, or the boys and one of the girls go into slavery, and like it or not, this is what happens. They pick the smart girl and they go and get her educated, because they're hoping that that if they can put food on the table, she can be the one that gets educated.
I understand.
And they escape.
Yeah, I understand. But given that this is reality, right? So it does seem like my earlier statement was my question was like correct, right? So it seems like your position is, hey, if we stop doing business with these countries that are using slaves, right? If these people would actually like have it worse. So because they'd have it worse in the short term, and we don't have a way to like address the poverty that's leading them to agree to these deals in the first place, right? We should just keep doing business with countries that have slaves. It seems like that is your position.
No.
How
Ruby,
is this no? You
why
just
are you
told me.
such a bad faith
You
ass
just
sometimes?
you just told me that if we do not do this, and if they do file these slaves or whatever, or if they fire them, they might end up in worse conditions, right? So it seems like what you're saying is that we shouldn't use our influence to force this change through like just not buying their bricks anymore, right? So we shouldn't even attempt that because they're going to suffer in the short term. So we should put up with them having slaves and just ride it out and wait for their
I
wait
think
for their
aid is
economy to
going to
catch
be
up.
more
Shit
effective
sometimes,
in
dude.
this.
Wait,
Like,
wait for their
like,
economy to catch
such
up
a
for
lying
first
sack
order.
of shit.
So
Oh, God.
start. Give it a try.
yeah.
Oh,
So
fuck, dude.
again, there's research, and the research is mixed on whether sanctions would work on developing countries like India. Oftentimes, sanctions will just contribute to the problem of like what leads to people entering bonded labor contracts. And I think just in general, aid to these people, education to these people, making them aware that there are laws that protect them. The very fact that so many of them don't even realize that this is illegal, right?
Right.
Is an issue.
But it seems like there's an
Sure,
endless
but this is like
supply.
this is another this
Can
is
I please
but
engage
this
with
is
this bullshit, please?
but this is India we're talking about. If this were in the United States, we could directly, try to educate these people and whatnot. But this is another nation with other laws, another government, right? So like given that we don't have a way to like vote to give these people rights or whatever the fuck, right? So if we don't have that ability, and the only way we can affect the situation, it seems, is just through like advocacy, being sad about it on the internet, maybe holding some rallies, right? Or I think using our economic power and the fact that we're buying up all these slave bricks, right? And just
Why-
to try to force the change, right? So if none of those are on the table, it seems like what you're saying is, hey, we can't do anything about it. We can say, hey, this is a bad thing. We can maybe send people in there to give them
It's
pamphlets.
actually improved. Like it's not like they haven't made improvements in it. Actually, I mean, yes, it's still really bad, but I believe that it's the amount of bonded labor has actually decreased, and it decreased by like 60-some% between the early 2000s and then like the 2010s. So it's not like they're not making progress in this. It's still really bad, but it used to be worse.
Yeah, but but the claim by a lot of these like activists for this topic, right, are that
my
the reason they're saying that it's been reduced is because the government isn't counting people who are actually bonded laborers as bonded laborers, right? Because they have no evidence of a contract, or they just don't believe that that they don't have a way out of this, or whatever the fuck. So
It's
a
still
lot
not
of the
addressing the fact that they are addressing it, right? They are
on
addressing
paper,
it.
sure.
They are trying to no, not just on paper. They're addressing it. They're trying to make strides in this. Yes, there are cases where people are looking the other way, but they're still making effort. And I don't think it's right to punish developing countries, poor countries, where they're actually trying to fix the situation. I think if anything, we should be providing aid for the specific purpose of fixing that situation.
Can I engage just for a second?
One
with
second.
this
Hold
bullshit?
on.
He's been going back and forth lying about this.
Hold on. I promise you, Scott. I promise you, you'll be the star of the show. One second, okay? He's good for a second, okay? So it doesn't seem like the government is taking it actually seriously. First of all, you have to like plead your case. It seems, from what I've gathered, right? You have to plead your case to authorities, and authorities can say, no, this actually doesn't count as bonded labor, right? Basically, what Dubu was trying to imply, and to say that we have to educate this group. Well, there's an endless supply of poor people who don't know, right? And if the government was taking this seriously, it wouldn't be that, okay, you have come to me. You have said that you have been put in an illegal situation, right? It's illegal. An illegal situation, right? Effectively slavery. I'll hand you a piece of paper that says, oh, that's null and void. You get to walk away. Instead of taking action against the slaver. Oh, okay, we have a factory here that is using slave labor. Why is this person not in jail? They
should be in jail, but
They should be, they're not.
Part of
Or
the
I
issue is
understand.
that, part of the issue is, I was watching one of the documentaries on this, the people who are in these contracts are afraid of losing where they live, right? And from exiting this contract through the government. I linked something in your chat, PrimeCayes. It's between 2010 and not 2010, between I think it's 2000 and 2011. It's like a 64% decrease in child labor. So yes, there are tons of issues, but they're making stride. It's like they're still
Child labor is different.
Yeah.
At least the numbers I was giving you, that was not about child labor. That's not what I was talking about.
We're talking about bonded labor, though, right?
bonded
And a
labor.
significant portion, a significant issue. Why that's so controversial is because of the incidence of child labor. Because India has the most amount of child labor worldwide.
And I'm
of all
glad,
the
and
countries.
I'm glad they're taking action against child labor. And let's assume those numbers are correct, right? Fine. But in terms of bonded labor, that's still, if we acknowledge that, a form of slavery, right? Or an immoral coercion of work. But
But you
India is
can't
not actually
separate these.
taking
Bonded labor
serious.
specifically includes the children who are
No,
entered
I
into those
get that.
bonded
No,
labor
I've already given you
contracts.
that. I've already given you that. That's fine. Whatever.
Okay.
But I'm talking about the adults because we care about them too, right? Correct? Right?
Okay.
You're not.
Right.
You're
So-
missing the
So
forest through the trees.
I'm sure I am. I'm sure I am. Okay. But so if they aren't actually shutting down these factories, according to the statistic that I found, it was that 96% of these factories are using bonded labor, or these kilns, brick kilns are using bonded labor. Then obviously that tells me that the government doesn't actually give a shit, right? That it's actually unsanctioned, unofficially sanctioned. Excuse me. And so that seems like it would take corrective action by other powers, at least by the buyers of those bricks, because then it is slave labor that we are benefiting from.
Sure, we could definitely maybe encourage specifically on that industry, right? Like, but I think in general, I think that aid would be more useful in this case, and a lot of it. I think I was reading also fuck, I'd have to pull it up again. But there's a significant amount of the agriculture industry that has this like debt that requires people to enter bonded labor contracts. So, I mean, yeah, I guess we could look at specific products that use this type of labor, but I don't know.
Sure, and I'll go to you, Scott, because you're bursting off. Should private corporations? There was another article. I didn't send it to you guys. But there are corporations who look at their supply lines, right? Their supply chains, and then they find these things. They find this here, and here, where slave labor is being used, and they do something about it. Usually, this happens when there's an article and it points out, oh, you're using slave labor. Then they start to fucking care. But one or the other, that's what they do. So should they be able to take away their business from those suppliers, even though it'll make those the lives of those individuals worse of the bonded laborers?
Who's that?
I said Scott. I said you.
Okay. I mean, sure. Sorry, I'm trying to engage with conversation anyways, I'm going to go back a little bit, right? Because Doobie, I have to deal with this because Doobie was lying through his fucking teeth and constantly mischaracterizing what my position was, and then dismissing what we were saying by saying that the only thing that you can possibly do is sanction these people and that there are no other alternatives, and saying that I'm against sanctions in these situations. There are a ton of things that you can do positively to affect change. Sanctions is going to exacerbate the situation, right? Number one, the biggest problem we have currently is that the government agencies that are raiding things and dealing with tariffs and dealing with import export have a monopoly on so many things that it makes it difficult for other corporations and companies and buyers in the market to educate the American public or the consumer on where their resources and goods are coming from unless they try and get educated themselves. So that's a problem. I don't know if there's necessarily an immediate solution to that, but one of the solutions that we can do is begin to purchase items and purchase, like, we have an ultimate, like, kind of end goal responsibility as the person that is the consumer of products, right? And so one of the things you can do right now, if you live in Europe and you own an iPhone or a Samsung, I'm just going to say this, every person in Europe that owns an iPhone or a Samsung, you're an asshole, because there's Fairphone. Fairphone 4 exists, right? Fairphone 4 is 650 euros. It's a nicer fucking phone than anything Apple or Samsung have made. It's a 5G phone, and every single it has a 10 out of 10 rating from iFixit. Every single solitary piece of metal in that, even the oh my god, it's not cobalt. What is it called? Where they mine fucking coltan. Even the coltan is using ethically sourced coltan, and they use recycled tin. So we as consumers have to start understanding that these people are doing economic development in the Congo. These people are doing economic development in Ghana. These people's manufacturing bases in South America, where they hire women from families and give them healthcare and living wages. So as a consumer, you have a responsibility to educate yourself and try and be involved in this. And I think that's part and parcel of kind of like what we're doing here on Twitch. But in terms of what we can do in India, we can also invest in things like education. You can give to charities that do good things, right? Like actually do something. Like, I'm not going to say it for PrimeCayes channel, but like for all of you that have donated to my channel, you could just as easily have donated to Save the Bees, and you just as easily could have donated for fucking schools in India. Like, I appreciate it, but there are things you can do with your money. There are things you can do with your purchasing power. And there are things the state can do in terms of negotiating changes. But this idea that we're going to sanction, it's literally attacking the problem by, that's literally all it is. It's attacking the problem and causing more of the problem. It's just fucking stupid.
Okay, so I don't know why you said I lied, because I acknowledged
Because you
earlier.
lied. That's why.
I acknowledged earlier your ability to be sad about it on Twitch and to hold rallies and to advocate for people using other bricks, whatever the fuck, right? But given that this is such a massive industry in India, I don't think doing the don't buy fair phones and don't buy like slave bricks, whatever the fuck, is like realistically going to do anything about the issue. Right. I don't think there's any indication that this has worked in any of the other places where this kind of like public fucking like rallying cry has actually like done anything. Right. So they've done this about diamonds. People still buy blood diamonds. They've done this about shrimp. People still buy shrimp from slavers. They've done this about fucking lithium. They still buy that shit from slavers too. Like, this isn't like, it doesn't seem like this works. Right. So I mean, there's a massive documentary about exactly this issue, the brick kiln industry in India and its use of like slaves, years ago, all over the fucking news. Still a massive problem, right? So it doesn't seem like this works. I think that if we're going to be realistic about the issue, right, we should be advocating not just for people not to buy slave bricks, right, but for our government to also vote with its wallet, to say, hey, we no longer want to do business with slavers, right, and yeah, again, you can say the people who are undergoing this debt slavery right now, they're in poverty and they're going to suffer. Well, hey, if you're in favor of sending money to them right now to educate them, whatever the fuck, why not just say, hey, we can replace their bonded labor by having activist organizations go there and feed them when they lose their brick kiln jobs, right? While these people are forced to change the way that they're doing business, right? So it seems like, again, earlier I said that it seems like your position, and it seems like Eucharist's position, is to wait for the problem to work itself out and to advocate for people to be more educated, to like for the economy to industrialize, and for people to get out of poverty, and that's going to take a really long fucking time. And
that's not our
nudge
position.
it in that direction. We can
that's
nudge
not
in that
our
direction.
fucking position.
But yes, it is your position. Yes, it is.
No,
your position.
it's not.
I don't know why you don't just fucking own it, because that is what you're saying. You're saying, hey, we can't. The sanctions won't work. We need to do something about poverty, but we have no ability to fix poverty in India from the United States, right? So it seems like what you're saying is that because we have no ability to do anything about poverty in India from the United States, we should just accept that we
Nobody
buy
is
slave
saying
bricks.
that, Doobie.
That's
Stop
exactly what
fucking
you're fucking
lying. Just stop it.
That's
For the
exactly
love
what
of
you're saying.
God.
Okay, so
You're
I
saying
just
that
fucking
that our
lying.
government should keep buying slave bricks
It's
because
so
you think
fucking-
that not buying the slave bricks would hurt the
all
slaves
right,
more.
okay.
That's what you're saying.
Hey, I linked something in the group chat. Okay,
Oh my God.
so this position that the government isn't doing enough isn't supported by what I just linked.
And that was the other thing
the-
that you mentioned, Stardust. And I think maybe you weren't making the connection quite, but the idea of why childhood slavery is so important when talking about bonded labor is intergenerational slavery, right? If you can get the children out of a lot of these things and get them educated, you don't have a problem that keeps repeating itself from generation to
That's the main issue, yeah. With children who are working 14 hours a day, like they don't have time for anything else, right? There's no time for any type of education. So getting the children out of bonded labor is most important. It's I mean, yeah, like you're saying, like this, intergenerational slavery.
Wait, but Scott
Yeah,
said that getting them out of that, right, would lead them to working in like the sex industry and shit like that.
That's
Well,
not-
we want
they'd
to
actually
enable
go to
them to
worse
get out of
conditions.
it. We want to
Hey,
enable them to get out of it in a way that that we're fixing the cause of that, right? We want to
Sure. So
fix the
donate
cause.
some money
Yeah.
to like some charity organization in India, but still don't buy slave bricks. Like I don't. Why would we keep buying the thing
Sure.
that is?
You know what? Fine. That's fine. If we want to go specifically and target specific slavery produced industries, then that's fine. I'm fine with that. But like sanctions as a whole, I think I would think very hard about that.
Yeah, what I'm advocating for, to be clear, is for the United States to not buy slave bricks, basically. That's
fine.
it, right? So given that we are the people that buy the majority of these bricks, like it seems like us not buying them unless they rework the way that they're doing business would force a lot of these people to rework the way they're doing business because we're their biggest market.
Again, this is why I brought up Bangladesh, right? Your argument is don't buy these goods, sanction these goods. What happened when we've done this in the past?
You just advocated for people to do this in the individual sense, right? You advocated for individuals not to buy these things. Yes, you did.
No, I did not.
Yes, you did.
No, I did not. No, I
You
did
said they
not.
should buy the Fairphone over the
Ruby,
Samsung
Ruby.
phone because the
Yes.
Fairphone does. Okay, so wouldn't you also say that individuals shouldn't buy slave bricks? That they should vote with their wallet and put their money somewhere else?
There is a difference between advocating for specific companies that are giving alternatives, that are helping people, that are setting up fair labor in these specific areas, right? They are the money that you are spending on a Fairphone is going into the Congo, right? And it is giving money and aid support against Congolese warlords and economically competing with them to free the Congolese people. It is doing the same thing in Ghana where people are literally naked miles underground and coming out with chunks of metal and getting like chronic silicosis smashing shit, right? So that there are other places in the same region where they are supporting growth, where your money is specifically going towards getting people jobs, bringing people out of poverty.
Okay, so then you'd be fine if maybe we did sanction these places, but
no. I don't need to hear the but.
Okay, fine, whatever. Well, other people, if we did sanction these people, but also then funded growth, right? So on the other, and it's like so it's like we can stop buying the bricks. So the government can say like we aren't buying these bricks, but on the other hand, we are putting money into these economic development programs that will hopefully eventually increase or lower the economic divide between citizens and stuff, and so that people won't get taken advantage in the first place. It seems like
and it seems like why not just say, hey, yeah, we shouldn't buy slave bricks, but if we identify brick companies within India that aren't having like slave labor or whatever the fuck, we should buy from them instead. Right? Like why not advocate for that rather than advocating for us to keep buying the slave bricks? Like that doesn't make any sense.
Because that's not what you're saying.
That is what I'm saying.
What you're
That's
saying
exactly
is
what I said.
sanctioning. What you're saying is sanctioning and boycotting goods on a massive scale.
No, I'm saying the
underdeveloped
United States should no longer buy bricks from slavers. So if we identify a company
what
within
part
India
am I wrong about?
that
What
is
part
not
am I
doing
wrong about?
that, okay, so
You
if we
said that you
identify,
support harsh sanctions and boycotts, correct?
I support the United States specifically not importing bricks from India that are made with slave labor.
How many
That's what
bricks
I've been
does
able
the
to.
United States government buy?
The U.S. is the largest importer of these bricks.
No.
right?
The
It's
United States government. How
uh,
much does the United States government buy?
I would need to look it up for you, right?
Right,
But I
because what
think the
you're not-
government
you're
should not
advocating
allow
for sanctions.
individual citizens
Here you
to
go.
purchase these
Right.
bricks. Yeah.
Right, you're talking about massive scale sanctions on underdeveloped nations where the problem is poverty, and you think you're going to solve it by striking more poverty at them, despite the evidence showing time and time again that when you do these types of large sweeping actions, what occurs is these people end up in worse conditions.
But what if we created
or-
programs
or-
to mitigate for that?
No, hold on. Or you just buy the bricks from people in India who don't have slave labor, so you incentivize that behavior to not have fucking slave labor, because if you do have slave labor, you're not gonna be able to sell to the United States, right? So
That's
I don't-
that's a totally different thing.
that's what I've been saying this entire fucking time.
No, it's not, Doobie.
When I
Don't
say
try and
slave bricks,
move the
are you
goalposts.
assuming that I mean all bricks from India? No, I'm saying slave bricks.
No, you're saying sanctioning India. Now you're saying targeted sanctions, which is better. But even
We're
if you do
specifically
targeted-
talking about targeting this industry. What
okay,
do you
this industry? Oh my god! So you're
an
gonna
industry? If people within this
where
industry
are you gonna make
are
up
using
that
slave
amount of
labor
bricks?
to make bricks, we do not buy those bricks, and we don't allow citizens to import those bricks. Right? Instead we identify people within India that are not doing this, and we buy from them instead. Like why?
Okay,
Why? I don't
so
understand
how are
why
you
this
gonna
is
offset
so.
that difference? Because I guess because you're intentionally pretending to not understand concepts that
I
know
don't
you're
think
smart
that. I
to
don't think that's
understand.
true. I think you're stumbling over the dumb shit you've been saying. Because I've been very clear. I think I've been very
No, you've not
specific
been
about my
very clear.
language.
You've been
I think
strawmanning this entire time.
I think you say things and then 5 minutes later forget you said them, because again a little
What did
bit
I
ago
forget? What did I
you
say?
advocated
Okay,
for individuals to not buy these things
So-
or to vote with their wallets, right?
fine.
Then when I brought that up, you said, "Oh no, I didn't say individuals."
Oh,
shouldn't do it."
okay.
Right, so like
I never
Yeah,
said that.
okay,
You
okay,
said
Why does
that's
your
fine, that's
frog
fine.
have an eye
Now,
ring?
we do the whole. Now we're doing the whole meta argument. All right, that's fine. So to everyone else, all right, in terms of these sanctions, first of all, I disagree with you, starters, with the before we get to that, I disagree with you on the link that you sent that it proves that the government is doing anything. It's a plan as to what the government should be doing. So
It gives them a B on their government response.
gives them a B. Okay, right, but it's not actually shutting down these slave kilns.
So we're just gonna go to economic war with countries that we just disagree with on stuff
On slavery. Yeah, maybe on slavery. Yeah, sure, maybe.
that aren't getting rid of it fast enough. Then
Are letting it flourish. If you're not shutting
Letting
it
it
down by the source, so
flourish?
you can say that again. You can
We're-
say
if
that
we're-
we
if
can
we're- if-
we
if
can
it's,
educate these
the
people.
country's
You can say that we can
responding to
educate
it.
these people as to not get into the bondage labor in the first place,
So-
which is great, right? 100%. However, if you keep the
How is it
people, the
flourishing?
slave masters in place, they will find more slaves somewhere.
how is it flourishing?
There's 125,000.
Explain to me
I will explain to you.
Okay.
There's 125,000 brick kilns in India, and then 96% of them use bondage labor.
Okay.
23 million people, from the estimate that I found, up to 23 million. I found 8 million. I found 18 million. I found 23 million. So it's fuzzy numbers here. But are in this industry. So it sounds like India ain't doing shit. That's what it sounds like.
Did you miss the part where they've been taking measures to decrease this?
I know.
to-
Yes, I hear you. I hear you. I hear
So
you.
it's
I
just
hear
not
you.
fast enough
They
for
don't.
you.
They're
So-
not
so-
America.
So if it's not decreasing fast enough, then it's flourishing.
If
basically.
the slavers are not in jail, then yeah, I don't think it's fast enough. I think that's fair enough to say, right? And that we punish the slavers, and we don't just say, hey, person in slavery, you are free. That's one step, sure, right? But then you like arrest the person doing the crime, or they're just gonna keep doing it. If they're allowed to
I
keep
agree
running their
with
business.
I agree with the idea of just specifically targeting the brick industry. But I feel like I don't know what you're proposing other than that. Like I know what you're saying as far as like the laws, as far as like putting slavers in jail. But like, how are you going to make that happen?
PrimeCayes.
Well, hold on.
This is literally what you're advocating for.
How are you going?
You're
to
literally,
Scott. I want to talk to Stardust. She's really nice. Right? I like her a lot. She's cool. All right, let's give her a try. Right?
shut up, Prime. I hate you. No, I'm just kidding.
So you're asking what? How do we make that happen? We put economic pressure on the country. Right? We start there, and that can be one, sanctioning the bricks themselves, and then maybe possibly further sanctions on other areas depending on what we if we care about it, or how much we care about it. Excuse me. And then also, if you want to pair this up, saying, okay, we want to give you the stick and the carrot as well. For the people who are exiting, right? If this government is helping people exit, well, here are funds to help them transition to a new life, right? And if you're working towards these milestones, right? If we can actually see real progress, then we'll lift those sanctions altogether. In fact, you won't need them if you're targeting slave kilns.
I think we just need to target, if you're going to target anything, just target specifically the bricks, right?
I said that.
Well, I mean, you were saying other things as well.
I said
right?
possibly.
Okay, possibly. So now no longer possibly?
It depends. I can't. If you want me to design an exact plan,
I mean,
this,
look, I don't have a problem with targeting the bricks.
a framework, a basic framework.
I just have a problem with sanctions that might cause might aggravate the causes of why people enter these contracts in the first place, right? And a lot of it is in the agricultural industry. 60% of India's population works in the agriculture industry, and that's like being generous. And there's a high rate of suicide there. So aggravating. And also they had that huge protest last year. So aggravating the causes that lead people to enter these contracts is going to lead to more suicide. A lot of people are gonna starve, and it's gonna fucking suck. So,
right? Don't sanction the agriculture industry. Done. All right. Moving on.
That's not how economies work, PrimeCayes. Like, you're literally advocating for things that are going to cause children to be sold into sex slavery, that are going to cause people to commit suicide, that is going to cause starvation. You're going to cripple economies, right? And the reason you're doing this is because you've created a standard that says India must be as good as we are in the first world at fighting the corruption. They are fighting to stop this. And
they've committed
yes,
to
they
eradicating
are
slavery by 2030. They've committed to eradicating slavery by 2030.
They committed. Just like the target goals that the U.S. always sets, right? India, right, which has a long history of caring about the undercast, right? They are actually going to by 2030, right? In 8 years, they are going to get 23 million people out of bondage, right? But
sounds like the white moderate that MLK warned us about in his letter to Birmingham. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
You want to put a timetable on another person's freedom, Stardust?
Actually, it's interesting. One of the major arguments from slave skeptic, right? Slavery skeptic Americans way back when was that if you free the slaves, they're not educated, they don't know how to read, that they don't have any property. So if you're going to set them free, they're going to have nowhere to go. They're going to end up dying because they're just like animals and they can't take care of themselves. Right. So and this was a major concern for lots of people who didn't believe in slavery, but didn't think you could release slaves because they'd actually be worse off.
That's not really my argument.
It's kind of what you guys are saying, right? If we
so.
go out of our way to force this country to stop enslaving people,
not really my
the
argument.
slaves might end up. Well, not your argument, but I think Scott's argument. The slaves might end up in sex slavery. They might end up depressed and might kill themselves, right? So it sounds very similar to me.
Okay.
Yeah, we get it.
Okay,
Steven, please.
Okay. This is okay. Listen, Scott's got a lot of crazy shit on this panel. All right. Now it's my turn to say that Scott is absolutely correct. Okay, there are stages that economies take when it comes to reaching full levels of happy middle class industrialization. Now, people will look at some economies and say, wow, these people work in sweatshops. We need to eradicate all of the sweatshops immediately. But the next step of that isn't going to be, wow, you got rid of all the sweatshops. Now Amazon and Google moved in and everybody's working cozy programmer jobs. It's, oh, okay, well, everybody's going to go back to fucking subsistence farming and talking about what jobs they want to work in the commune. So if you have countries who have large swaths of their economy, built around varying levels of slavery or bondage, if you come in and you just sanction the fuck out of the economy, it's not like they're magically going to invent all of the institutions and economic measures necessary to employ people in ways that we would consider acceptable. So you have pathways to success on this. You have markers every year to make sure that you're meeting your obligations, and you do what you can from an external point, whether that's aid, whether that's economic deals, whether that's some sort of FDI, foreign direct investment, whether that's IMF loans, whatever it is, to slowly ease that economy towards that. If you just start sanctioning the fuck out of them, then everything will just get fucked. It'll collapse. You'll feel better because you're not buying slave labor from anybody, but instead the people that aren't selling themselves into sex slavery will just be starving to death on the streets. And you haven't really accomplished anything besides make yourself feel a little bit better about the situation.
Wait,
Yes.
okay, but what?
We
Okay, so
agree.
what in there, right? Presents like an issue with what I said, right? So no longer doing business with these brick makers that are using slave labor, and instead shifting that business to slave laborers. I'm sorry, to brick makers who are not. Right, so this seems like we wouldn't just be like wiping out their industry.
But chances are, if you were to sanction them, they would just sell their bricks elsewhere on the planet. That's the most likely thing that's going to happen immediately.
It's the difference between like a surgical approach and a blunt
Right,
approach.
but this is why I was saying earlier. So not just the United States, but the European Union, even, right? We should be advocating for this happening there too, because the U.S. and the European countries are the major places that are buying these bricks. Right, we're their biggest buyers. Right.
Yeah, but the problem is people feel really weird when you start using economic sanctions to enforce domestic policy in other countries. So for a current events relationship with this, a lot of people don't like the idea that SWIFT was used by the United States. So that financial system that's supposed to be just a financial impartial system is being weaponized politically to enforce some sort of international foreign policy on another country. People don't like the idea that it's used that way. Now people are looking to other, perhaps like international monetary systems or banking systems, like, well, fuck, I don't know if I like that this is being weaponized. If you start using sanctions and you weaponize it against countries that aren't engaging in very clear, flagrant abuses of like civil rights or of human rights, if they're like genociding people, if you start using it in other ways, then people are going to start looking at a lot of countries that you could potentially hit. My guess is probably every single developing country has some varying amounts of like servitude or bondage slavery or even chattel slavery. And the idea of just smacking all of these people with huge sanctions and then like ruining their economies and kind of their access to markets, I don't think it's going to create the world that we want. It's probably better to work in a positive direction where you're engaging in positive trade agreements, you're incentivizing the type of economic development that we want. That's probably going to be a better way to go about than just like sanctions are just historically and notoriously like not that effective. It's a
Right, but it
huge
seems like
hammer. It's a huge
seems
hammer.
like what I
How long have we
proposed.
sanction the fuck out of like Iran and Russia, and we're not yet getting exactly what we want. And these are like way more developed economies with way more trade or trade relationships with other people, right?
Yeah, but it seems like what I propose would be one way to incentivize positive activity or positive growth, right? So just saying, hey, the United States is no longer buying your bricks, if you're doing these things, right? If you have like the slave labor, whatever the fuck, right? And we start buying bricks from people in India that don't use slave labor. It seems like that would incentivize the brick kiln owners who are using slave labor to stop using slave labor.
I don't think it's quite that simple because why are they? Well, so here, this is simple. Why do they use the slave labor?
It's probably to keep costs down.
Yeah, it's
Right,
probably
it's very
way
cheap.
fucking cheaper. So if we say that we don't want to do that anymore, we want to buy other types of bricks, it might be the case that India is not really that competitive at making bricks outside of slave labor markets. You have things called substitution effects where we'll start looking to other places for goods. Maybe it is the case that there are European countries, and maybe even locally, we can produce bricks that are actually more competitive with Indian labor when it's not being done in a slave labor sense. So maybe what you actually do with that sanction is you just destroy that industry completely. Like these are the issues that you run into. Sanctions are like nukes when we need like cruise missiles or like bunker busters or whatever. Like the sanctions are they're huge hammer. They're huge. It's just a huge hammer.
Okay, so what if it was something softer? Like, so rather than no longer doing business with these people at all, they had like to pay like an additional kind of like fee or some shit.
Tariff.
Yeah, some kind of like tariff. right?
That would be a great policy for the Indian government to implement. That if you're not meeting certain labor practices or standards, there's fees or regulations or something that you've got to pay additional money for. That would be good for the Indian government to enact. We can't enforce that like internationally. What are we going to be sending in like the UN, like Human Rights Council? Are we going to be sending them in to like investigate the industries of other sovereign states? Like that's never going to happen. Right?
Are we just
Doesn't the United States
reinventing
do this?
mercantilism on the panel right now?
Real quick, I gotta dip out.
Okay.
I gotta go. My mom's got home from the airport early. Buy a fair phone. If you sanction India, you're just gonna cause a bunch of problems, and we'll buy our bricks from Moldova.
Scott.
Slave labor, and I love you guys.
Scott, shout out to you though. I actually thank you for letting me know about Fairphone. I'm gonna look into that. Seriously.
You got to get someone, if you're in America, you got to get someone in the UK or something to kind of slightly illegally ship it to you. And there's only some cell phone companies you can use. But if you're in Europe, it's all good to go. All right. Deuces. Love you. Nice
Bye,
seeing
Scott.
you all. I miss you, Eucharist. Fuck everybody else. I'm kidding.
Okay. Well, back to my slave phone.
Goodbye,
all right. Continue on. You were someone's talking to Destiny there?
Yeah, I think the United States already has done this, right? So we've already used tariffs.
Yeah, we've done sanctions a lot, and I've debated sanctions a lot. And every time I go and dig up like arguments on sanctions, what I find every single time is politicians say these are really good, they affect our outcomes, we do these are good for us, like this is doing a good job. And every single economist, university is like, sanctions suck shit. It's way too simplistic the way that we levy sanctions. Maybe there might be some incredibly sophisticated, highly nuanced way that we do multilateral sanctions, but typically what happens is there's two things that happen. One, when you sanction somebody, they just sell products to somebody else, and then we'll start buying like the same shit from other people. So like it doesn't protect our own local industries because we substitute our goods from other places, and it doesn't actually damage their industries as much as much because they substitute buyers from other places. Unless you get like a whole trade union, a whole worldwide thing on it, which we won't be able to because holy fuck, that would be huge. It's just not an effective way of controlling another country's domestic policy.
So Stephen, then what do you suggest then? Like I
have to encourage India to do it. It's not it's not the purview of the United States government to control domestic policy of other countries. As nice as it would be, that's just not our job. Unless there's huge human civil rights abuses, like you're talking like genocide or some shit. Even at that, we don't always intervene. It's just not in the purview of the United States to control the economic or domestic policy of another country. We just don't have the power to do that.
So
with that same reasoning, like what if like there's a country that decides like the minimum wage in another country is like equivalent to slave labor, right? Are we going to
that's what we do. That's the benefit of multilateral trade agreements. It might be the case that when you go to negotiate these trade agreements, you've got people that are like labor unions that are involved on our side, and a labor union on our side might say, listen, we are party to this agreement. If you want to buy this type of good, if you want to buy tables from Vietnam, that's fine, but people that are making tables in Vietnam, they have to be paid this wage because we're not going to engage in trade deals where you guys are either subsidizing your industries. So we fight with Canada over that. You can't subsidize industries that are competitors, and you can't have slave labor in your industries. They have to be paid a certain wage so that our workers can remain competitive. Otherwise, they're just going to price us out of everything. You can do that in the form of multilateral trade agreements, but you see in those cases, we're not hammering the other country saying, fuck you, get sanctioned, fuck you, die. What we're saying is if you want access to our markets at these preferential rates, which is what a multilateral trade agreement is, you have to agree to these terms, and we'll agree to these terms. So everybody's kind of working together. We're not necessarily controlling their policy. We're just making a deal that they'll change theirs for more access to our markets.
Okay, so yeah, I think this is kind of what I've been advocating for, right? So not just the United States, but like the European Union, even trying to work out some kind of deal like that, and advocating for these countries to work out that kind of deal, because it would take like you're right, they would just shift to supplying another market, maybe, right? If the United States pulled out, maybe they'd sell to China or something.
Mm-hmm.
But if we had like a trade agreement with like multiple countries, all of their biggest like European importers, it does seem like this would have an effect, right? So like, why shouldn't we be advocating for something like that? You could say, hey, this is not really realistic.
Yeah, because how many things? Let's say there's some country that doesn't let women go to school. Like, should we start getting everybody to sanction them?
Well,
there's
be clear.
some country that doesn't have equal rights for LGBTQ people, or what do they have for LGBT people, but not?
I'm totally in favor of like using.
Okay, hold on, wait.
I
never ever care what you're personally in favor of because we're talking about international relations here. It doesn't matter what we're personally. I would like that too. That would be base as fuck if we could force the entire world to be super woke. But we can't do that, right? The reality is we probably can't enforce our domestic policy on other countries unless we can incentivize it with multilateral trade agreements. Otherwise, we could run that back like a million. Like, what about countries that don't support abortion, right? That force women to have back abortion. like, or what?
Yeah,
Like,
we can't do it all the time, but we can do it sometimes, right? We can do it in a targeted way.
like, is this where we start to exercise that much political capital to try to get these particular things done? Is this really in the benefit of all the countries involved? Is it like a good show of force by the United States? Is this really what we should be focusing on? Like,
Yeah,
Combating
like
slavery?
can
Yeah.
we actually do it, and what are the actual harms? I think are the two really important questions, right?
Mhm.
Like, can we
Yeah, I
actually do
think
that effectively? Is that a thing that is it actually going to accomplish the end that you want it to?
I think
Especially
I
when,
think
like, those countries probably don't really want slaves. Nobody does. Nobody really wants, like, even the big evil companies would rather make so much money that they can pay stable employees that aren't like prone to weird uprisings, that don't work with weird governments that might steal your shit half the time. Like, typically everybody wants people to be doing better. So, like, I don't think that India is like proud of their slavery. I don't think India likes it. I don't even think the companies are necessarily like it. It's just the thing that's the most affordable. It's the easiest cost to manage. But I think, like, if they continue to move in the right direction, like, look at how many people in China have moved into middle class jobs, right? Those people aren't all working in misery anymore. I think
Yeah.
that as the country slowly industrializes, it'll move in that direction, and then hopefully we like poke and prod it and push it in that direction as well. But we can't just come in and say, like, change all your shit up. Fuck you.
Sorry.
By the way, we're a super industrialized, super first world country. Fuck you if you're a
Destiny, what
developing.
is this like business about from companies? I don't think companies care. As long
Companies
as they
do
are
care. Companies
sourcing, as long
What?
as they're most of the time, people don't know. People have no idea that what
No,
companies
no,
are
but I'm
doing.
saying
right?
when a company is looking to export supply chains to other parts of the world, I had an MBER paper on this, but I don't have it right now. But companies will actually prefer places where labor costs are a little bit higher if there's more stability in the government and the economic system. Because even though people think that, like, evil companies want to go and hire slave labor, those countries, unfortunately, they suck. Governments change oftentimes. Your shit will just get expropriated by the government sometimes, or it's not really reliable and it's fucked. Companies actually prefer stable employment centers, even if the wages are a bit higher. So I think that they would prefer a more stable, less
But
slavery.
define stable, because stable is doing a lot of work here. So does stable mean that we have, like, for instance, an authoritarian government that will make sure that people don't unionize, that people don't rise up, right? And they will do what they're told. I mean, that's pretty fucking stable. Or does stable mean, oh, we have a democratic democratic institutions, right, that support the workers, and if the workers decide, you know what, I want a higher wage than what this company is providing for me, then we're going to allow them the space to negotiate that. Like, what's stable here?
Stable would probably be an area where you could establish a shop. The government isn't going to steal your shit through expropriation. There's not going to be like a huge coup or uprising, and like a particular labor reform isn't going to completely wipe out your method of doing business there. That would be my guess for like the type of.
And a
stability
labor reform that could wipe out your method of doing business there is that if the price increases because the workers have demanded a higher wage, the price increases, then it's like, well, I'm not competitive anymore. And
Yeah,
so that's
exactly. So,
investment.
like, if you go to a country and you're like employing all slaves, and then there's a big labor uprising, and then all of a sudden they don't want to be slaves anymore. You're like, oh shit, we're fucked. Our whole investment here is fucked. So I think you would prefer cheap labor places, but places with a little bit more structure where it's not like completely.
I hear that, but like I'm saying, a union could also do the same thing. So people who are not slaves, right, who can leave and whatever, right?
Yeah, union could theoretically do the same. That's why unions fight against capital and they negotiate a wage somewhere in the middle, right? This is the.
But I'm saying that
natural
that companies. So my issue here is your idea of what is stable and what a company actually wants or actually cares about. So I'm not willing to give this goodwill, this benefit of the doubt to companies that they
It's
actually.
not goodwill. I'm not asking for goodwill or benefit. I don't give a fuck about that. Companies don't give a fuck about that, but they want some level of stability, right?
I agree. No, I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. I'm not arguing on that part. That makes sense, right? I'm just arguing with your definitions of stable and definition of well, the other thing
When
that I
there's
fucking
like
mentioned,
mass
sorry.
poverty, starvation, indentured servitude, like that doesn't usually foster the good conditions for. I'm sure there are some developing world countries where you can take advantage of them for a while, but like these conditions will change. That's the story of human history. It's these conditions slowly changing.
I agree, but I'm okay. So maybe I'm not being clear. So I think that a company might, as you say, not prefer to do business with slavery because of slavers, because that might be unstable, right? You could have other governments or something step in, right? They get embarrassed by the whole situation, right? Like they have a public relations nightmare. There are all kinds of reasons why you don't want to have to deal with slavery or bondage labor or anything like that. Okay, so agreed. But on the other end, right, for a stable nation, under an authoritarian, maybe, right, that crushes unions and that works with you, that you can just maybe pay off. If you're having trouble of these labor, with the provided labor, you can pay off and they can send the police force against them, right? I think that level of stable is perfectly fine for
Yeah, sure, but
most
it's really
corporations.
hard to find authoritarian regimes like that, like maybe Russia, but like it's very
Are you
hard to
sure?
find yeah, those countries that stay stable for a long time. Yeah, those countries suck. Like I think that from the 90s and onwards, I mean, liberalism didn't just win up just because the United States backed it. I think that the economies that you create there are generally more stable, or generally more prosperous. People are generally happy when they're not living under like autocratic, authoritarian, anti-democratic regimes. It seems to work out better in the long run.
What?
Yeah, I don't.
Go ahead. You go first.
Well, I don't think we have to assume any benevolence, right? Like, I think it's just like, yeah, I think we can all agree that things that companies like might occasionally be things that we find like morally bad. But yeah, I think the things that are generally profitable are better than, uh, as Scott was saying before he left, right? We see a trend in places that have sweatshops and things like that towards a kind of industrialization that is better than the thing that preceded it, right? Like that we all kind of agree is like morally and economically better. So whether or not we could accelerate that, through whatever Doobie is advocating for, we could argue about. But like the things that companies like can be better than the thing that came before it. Yeah.
Okay. There's more to argue with this, but unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to hear Destiny, but that was really interesting at the end there. Thank you so much. Okay, to my audience, we're going to continue on for Open Walk On panel right after this. The content does not end, it never ends here. So stick around. Hit that follow button if you haven't done so yet. Hit that follow button and make sure notifications are on so you know I'm going live. !social for all my social media, Twitter, Discord, and YouTube. Remember, in YouTube, of course, you will find the VODs if you missed anything, right? If you missed us driving Scott absolutely fucking up the wall, right? Well, then go relive the memories. Hit up our YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, and consider becoming a YouTube member, supporting us that way. Also, consider subbing to this channel, right? Subscribing to this channel, gifting bits or gifting subs if you like this content. If you want us to continue, then support this community. We'd really love to have you here. But we need your help to make that happen. Okay, I'm going to give an outro to all these amazing individuals, and then we'll continue on from there. So thank you, Eucharist. Dude, I'm so happy to have you around. This is the worst. Destiny hates this part when I say nice things to people. Eucharist, though, I really like you. I'm gonna say nice things about you. You're really smart. You're intelligent. You're fun to argue with. I wish I could have heard more from you today. But you were. It's happy. It makes me happy to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I'll just say, like, I appreciate Prime having me on as a person with no real platform and no real nothing really to gain from this. I just like I like arguing, and I like yelling at people on the internet, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, I mean, the conversation went directions that no one can expect, and sometimes I'll yell more and sometimes I won't. But it was good to be here. It was good to hang out with you guys, and yeah, love these conversations.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Next we'll go to Stardust. Stardust, thank you for coming through and arguing with me and losing gracefully. I do appreciate that. I always look for that in you guys.
I'm sorry that you can't understand them. By the way, guys, thanks for having me. # deport all men. Get rid of the penoids. I want a female ethnostate now. Thanks.
Jesus.
That's wonderful. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And you're the first one to go, Prime. So. in Minecraft.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Deport me to a paradise? No women? No. All right, let's moving on. I think you Stardust for all that. We have our Dark Lord and Savior. His name is Doobie. All right. Doobie, thank you for coming through and making arguments that make baby Jesus cry. So Doobie, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. So I'm Doobie from the Politics Server on Discord, discord.gg/politics. And just FYI, tomorrow at about 4 p.m. Eastern, the worst time zone, we'll be having David Pakman on for an AMA. So that should be a lot of fun. So yeah, if you're interested in that, you want to talk to David Pakman, swing by, ask him some questions.
The Pac-Man will be on the Pulse Discord server. The link is in my chat. Exclamation point Doobie in chat for that link if you're too lazy to type it out. But yeah, please check it out. He does awesome AMAs with like a lot of big guests. It happens all the time, right? So check him out. And then finally, we have Steven. Steven.
Hi, it's been fun. I like screaming at you guys. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
How was League of Legends, Steven? Tell us about that. Was it
Great.
great? That was fun. Okay. Steven, seriously, thank you for coming through. Thank you for sharing your audience with us. Much appreciated. And we hope to have you again soon. All right. Moving on. We will continue on with our open welcome panel. Anyone here can join us. But if not, that's okay. Thanks for your time, your energy, your knowledge, and your passion with my community. I know they appreciate. Fuck you, Steven. Bye.
What? You fuck you? You said it was over. Fuck you.